from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in London, where COVID finally caught up with me, I'm afraid. Thank you to Eleanor Oldroyd for sitting in for me last week, but I'm much better now, glad to say, and I've been enjoying some really close games in the Women's 50-over World Cup, it has to be said. Australia, though, continue to be juggernauts. They're through to the semi-finals, along with South Africa also through. And, well, England, they look like they're good for the semi-finals, but it's still going to come down to a bit of a crunch, I think, for India in their last group game as well. But it's been a really fascinating tournament out there in New Zealand, that's for sure.
Long-time listener, first-time guest co-host Brett Sprigg here in Sydney Alley, where the wet conditions across most of Australia's east coast haven't dampened the enthusiasm of Aussie cricket fans who have been not only proud of Meg Lanning's team and their efforts throughout this Women's World Cup, but also an enthralling men's test series over in Pakistan.
Hi, and I'm Sunil Gupta in New Delhi, where it's really hotting up, not just because it's got really hot, it's the warmest March for many years, but also because we've had no international men's cricket for quite some time now, which is about 2 weeks. And everyone's really looking forward to the one and only extravaganza called, yes, you've got it absolutely right, the lull before the storm right now, the IPL.
Well, it's no surprise that we're going to start with the IPL this week. But first of all, Brett, it is a great pleasure to have you with us this week, filling in for Jim. Welcome to you. And Sunil, good to see you again as well, of course. It is the 15th season of the India Premier League. And with two new teams entering the competition this year and the biggest stars in world cricket competing, it promises to be bigger and more extravagant than ever. Sunil, just how is the excitement in India for this new season, especially, fingers crossed, with the whole season expecting to be played in India?
Yeah, that's right. It's not going to be played all across India. There are just 3 or 4 venues in which it's going to be concentrated. But I can tell you, the type of coverage that I've seen in the sports pages of the national newspapers is as if India's won a World Cup, with that type of full spreads and pictures and statistics and predictions and what have you. So it's really, as I said, in the beginning, that everybody is waiting with bated breath for this IPL. And it promises, as I said, to be, a really super show coming up.
Yeah. Brett, some of the Australians, of course, aren't going to be there for the start of the IPL, like Pat Cummins and Josh Hazlewood, because, of course, they're on international duty. But listening to Andrew McDonald, Aussie's interim head coach out there with them, he actually sees the IPL as a real chance to sort of improve Australia's chances for the T20 World Cup coming up.
Absolutely. Whether he's right or not, and I personally believe he is, Ali, it speaks to a change in approach from an Australian perspective that hasn't previously given a lot of credence to the shortest format, particularly in franchise cricket. We've always tended to look down on players who perhaps prioritise things like the IPL over playing for the country. Not that that's the case this time around, because Cummins, Hazlewood and David Warner are in fact being rested from the one-day internationals in Pakistan, I imagine just to get some family time or something off the back of the Test series. But the Australian coach has a point about the need to coexist alongside these tournaments. As you mentioned, it's 15 years now of the IPL. It's not going anywhere. And Josh Hazlewood is a great example here. He played a key role last time around for the Chennai Super Kings in winning that title, then backed it up in the World Cup and was among the top 5 wicket takers there. Now, of course, he's with RCB this time around. But if that's good enough for a 3-format player, to work some IPL cricket into your personal schedule, then it will be something that Cricket Australia and their high-performance department are probably more inclined to give their blessing to.
Yeah, it's funny how you say, the IPL's not going anywhere, because I remember how long it took, for T20, the format, for people still to be saying T20's here to stay, 10 years into T20. So, the IPL, it's absolutely here, and it has been for a very long time. It's a fixture. Let's just take a look at the 2 new teams for this year. Firstly, the Lucknow Super Giants. They'll be captained by KL Rahul. They look to have a pretty strong bunch of all-rounders, don't they, from different corners of the world, including they've got Marcus Stoinis, Jason Holder, Krunal Pandya. So, is it refreshing, do you feel, to have 2 new teams? I mean, can the IPL Golden Goose ever be overcooked?
You've just stolen my thunder, Ali, because I was just about to use those words. But just before that, I just wanted to pick up from something that Brett said, which was this whole thing about building up towards the World T20 in Australia later this year. The ironic thing about India and the World T20 is that the only time we won the World T20 is when there was no IPL back in 2007.
True.
Since 2007, we've never won it. So, but there's this big thing about, there's a new captain, there's Rohit Sharma, and to build the right team and the right balance. We had completely the wrong balance for the Asia Cup that took place, or the earlier one, not the Asia Cup, the T20 that took place in Dubai. But right now, I think they're getting the team together. So that's one aspect of it. As to 10 teams, Ali, you're absolutely right. Killing the goose that lays the golden eggs, or the tipping point, to call it what you will. Because, then there'll be no end to the clamor from other state capitals. They say, listen, we want our share of this. We want our share of this. As it is, it's going to be 2 months long, 27th of March to the 29th of May. Can you ever think, has there ever been a tournament that long in the history of mankind? I cannot recall.
And what about the second team then? Gujarat Titans. Their batting, I suppose, you could say looks a little bit thin on paper maybe. They've lost Jason Roy now. Sort of bubble fatigue situation with him. He's taking a whole break from cricket. But captaining the side, Hardik Pandya, and he's won the IPL 4 times with Mumbai Indians. He's taking in that attitude that, maybe they shouldn't expect too much, that sort of sense of downplaying things, Sunil. Then I suppose you can only ever exceed expectations, can't you?
Yeah, well, Hardik Pandya, I don't know whether he's talking about himself or he's talking about the team, because he's also been in the centre of the storm. He's not been 100% fit. There's a lot of talk about him playing the World T20. He's not been bowling, and he's never been a captain. So, and of course, it's a new team. They've never played together before as a team. So there are a lot of challenges in front of him. So I think he's right in playing expectations down, because in this part of the world, if you raise expectations beforehand, and as it is, he's a bit of a high-profile guy, the way he dresses and the tattoos and the shades and everything else. I think it's right for him to downplay things right now and then actually show what they can do on the field.
Do you think he can be a good leader, Brett?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've seen what he can do as a player, and this is going to be a really interesting time for him to take care of a new franchise and lead, as you say, keep a lid on things and don't get too carried away. It's a pretty safe thing for him to play so far, but absolutely keen to see what he does as a leader in this team.
Got to ride those ups and downs. Now, the defending champions are, of course, Chennai Super Kings. They've got a pretty similar lineup to last year. However, they have lost Faf du Plessis to Royal Challengers Bangalore, and leg spinner Deepak Chahar is injured as well. Sunil, do you think it's going to take something pretty special from them to win the trophy again this year?
Yes, I think so. And I'll tell you why. It's not so much whom they've retained and whom they've lost. It's just because there's been so much churn in the teams itself. There are only 2 or 3 people or players that teams have retained. And so a lot of the big names have moved to other teams. And I think, therefore, it's going to be a very open IPL. If you look back to the past few years, it's been either Mumbai or Chennai. They've really been ruling the IPL. But I think right now, you have a much more open IPL. Of course, there are 10 teams, so many more matches to play, and therefore juggling the things. So I think, absolutely, I think that they will have a difficult time retaining the trophy, and that makes for a much, much more exciting IPL.
But it's getting underway without Kohli captaining, of course. Sunil, he's no longer captain of RCB. Faf du Plessis takes on that mantle. I mean, what about Kohli, the cricketer, now then? Do you think he'll just slip back into IPL and just enjoy it?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's time that he did. He's been captain all 3 formats and RCB for as long as I can remember. And that takes a toll. Whoever you might be, and, however strong you might be, it takes a toll, especially here in India when you're the Indian national captain across formats. There's a lot of talk about him. His, hasn't scored a test century in 2 years. And so it wears a person down. And I think this will really release him. And now, of course, they've got a completely revamped team. They've got some very good players as well. So I think it will really help. And I think du Plessis, of course, he's been captain of South Africa. He's done very well for the Chennai Super Kings. So I think he'll bring a measure of stability and placidity, if I might use that word, to the RCB, because they are a fairly volatile team with Virat Kohli. He wears his heart and everything else on both his sleeves. So, yes, I think it's a very good prescription for RCB.
I think we will miss kind of the Kohli camp aspect, won't we, though? Because he's so enigmatic. You have to watch him when he's captaining, don't you? He is so demonstrative, and he he's sort of magnetic almost, isn't he, when he's in that leadership role?
Well, he'll be magnetic in any case, I can tell you. He can't hide his emotions on the field. And to an extent, actually, the point that you were making, he's not won the IPL, despite the teams that he's had. And he's had some really big players, Chris Gayle and, all the big names. So I think that's also another thing that he's trying to get rid of. Because last year he was talking, this is our time and we're going to win. And of course, they never got anywhere close to it. So I think you'll still see Kohli as the Virat Kohli, maybe not as captain, but he will be animated and he'll be jumping around and he'll be rolling his eyes and, gesticulating and doing everything else. And that's the Kohli we want to see, and scoring runs.
So come on then, if I put you on the spot, Sunil and Brett, your pick for the team who could lift the trophy.
Oh, I'm saying this year is the year that RCB finally breaks through.
I think it's really time for Delhi Capitals.
Delhi Capitals were my pick as well. So I think they've got a really strong 11 when everyone is available. So that is the IPL. It's getting underway. It's going to be full of excitement, and we'll keep in touch with it here on Stumped, of course.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on ABC and All India Radio.
Well, next on Stumped, a much changed England men's test team are currently in action in the West Indies in the third of their 3-match series in the Caribbean. And that's a series that's tied after both of the first 2 matches were draws on pitches that unfortunately are a far cry from the fire and brimstone of Caribbean pitches of old. But whilst the action on the field between the two sides these days is very amicable, that wasn't necessarily the case on the MCC's tour of 1953-54. Now, a new book called Who Only Cricket Know, Hutton's Men in the West Indies, tells the story of the second most controversial tour in English cricketing history, coming only after Bodyline. The cricket was full of incidents on and off the field, much of which involving race and social class. Now, the author of this book is Doctor David Woodhouse, and he's with us on Stumped. David, welcome to you. Tell us a little bit more about this tour. It wasn't any ordinary test series, just what went on.
It was billed beforehand, actually, as the unofficial World Championship of Cricket, because as some listeners may remember, England had just beaten Australia for the first time at home in 26 years in the Coronation Ashes in 1953. And the West Indies had thrashed England in 1950. That's the series that produces that famous calypso, Cricket, Lovely Cricket. So even before the series, both sides, the press of both sides were hyping it up as the World Championship. And then, as you say, once it had finished, everyone said it was the second most controversial tour of all time. I actually wonder whether it was the most controversial, in fact. It had all the 3 key ingredients of Bodyline. So it had intimidatory bowling. 5 batsmen were put in hospital during the tour, including the great Jamaican legend George Headley. It had diplomatic incidents, one of which involved the Chief Minister of Jamaica. And afterwards, just as in the case of Bodyline, there was a court-martial at Lords where Fred Truman had his good conduct bonus docked. Trevor Bailey was stripped of the vice-captaincy. And in fact, there was a conspiracy by MCC to remove Hutton, who was the first professional captain of England, and replace him with David Shepherd for the Tour of Australia, which, of course, Hutton went on to win, thanks to Tyson and Statham.
We don't sort of revisit it in the same way, I suppose, that, Australian and Ashes series, you look back at past histories and there is so much literature on them. Is that one of the driving forces for you behind revisiting this tour? And tell us a little bit about, your own background and love of cricket.
Yes, I think I came to the tour. I actually came to the tour writing another book on the language of cricket many years ago, where I read Len Hutton's autobiography to try and find some, Yorkshire dialect. There wasn't much of that because it was ghosted by a southerner. But when I reminded myself of this series, I thought, why have 30 books been written about Bodyline and none about this series? In England, we've got all these social developments after the war, less deference to the establishment. And Hutton is a very symbolic figure, I think, on a lonely pioneering journey through the class barrier, having to deal with all these mandarins at Lords. And in the West Indies, of course, we're on the way to independence. That famous question, what do they know of cricket? Who only cricket know? CLR James actually asked that question in the context of series like these, where he says the islands are in the full tide from colonialism to independence. It takes another decade, actually, for all the West Indian islands to become independent. So it's at a moment in history where you get this tremendous mixture of individual personality and historical forces.
I guess you could apply this question to cricket or to geopolitically more broadly. What lessons were learned in the immediate aftermath of the tour, David?
Well, I mean, it's a good point you make about geopolitics because, when you read Wisdom, So on this tour, there was a riot, the first riot in Test cricket. There was an arson attack on the stands, on one of the stands in Trinidad. There was an assault of an umpire's family. There was alleged racial abuse of an umpire. And then Hutton was booed remorselessly in Barbados for the slowest day in Test cricket, 124 runs in 118 overs. Could you believe it? It makes the current Test series look like there was fast scoring. So there was all that going on. And I think the lessons that were learned from it was, should cricketers, I suppose, be considered as diplomats all the time? I wonder whether today a cricket team would have been put into that kind of atmosphere. They've been put into a state of emergency, and it's perhaps no surprise there was a riot at the Test match. So I think that's one lesson. And I suppose the other lesson is that cricket at that time had structures that were not necessarily progressive. So, I suppose my book has two journeys. One is the journey of Hutton as the first professional captain of England, and the other is the journey of West Indian cricket from 1950. Clive Lloyd described that first victory as VE Day, and then Worrell leads them to victory in 1963, which one English journalist called the celebrations were like VE Night. So I think those are some of the lessons we might draw from the tour.
David, it's been absolutely fascinating to listen your recount of that tour even now, and I'm sure it's whetted the appetites for everybody to delve deeper into it. But yeah, cricket in the West Indies is an utterly fascinating subject, and really, really pleased to delve into it with you here on Stumped. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That's Dr. David Woodhouse, author of Who Only Cricket Know. Well, that's all we've got time for this week on Stumped here on All India Radio. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at BBCWS Sport. And don't forget to use the hashtag BBC Stumped. And check us out on YouTube as well. Go to the BBC World Service's YouTube channel. You'll find us there. My thanks to Sunil Gupta and to Brett Sprigg. And of course, to all of you. And we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.